What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Questex, and we're gonna have a serious conversation here. HBO boxing is in trouble, and if you don't think so, after tonight's very, very weak showing, you're either a diehard HBO boxing fan who, hold on for a second, my phone is vibrating. Fuck, I had an alarm set. Okay, so where was I? HBO boxing is in trouble. And if you don't think so, you're either an HBO loyalist or you're just somebody who refuses to, call it quits when the game is over and it's out of reach. What I saw tonight in Cuadras versus Estrada, Inoue versus the bank teller, and Suarez versus Chocolatito Gonzalez. Tonight should be a wake-up call to a lot of people who follow HBO boxing and they believe whatever HBO tells them, that there is something fundamentally wrong with how they go about the business of promoting fighters. From Carlos Cuadras, who looked like straight trash after the fifth round, okay? I mean, there was literally at one point in the during the Cuadras fight and Estrada fight where Max Kellerman has to literally he's telling Harold Letterman that punches are not landing, that Cuadras is throwing, right? And they're having a fight. And see, here's one of the things why I think that the only redeemable commentator on HBO from HBO boxing is Max Kellerman, because you can see that he catches himself a lot of the times. He knows what common sense calls for, and he wants to be fair. But you can definitely tell that he's been given a script, and at times Max Kellerman deviates from it. The only other commentator that I remember that used to do that, and as you can imagine, they never really had him on for that long, although he was really horrible, was George Foreman and Lennox Lewis. Lennox Lewis was more, I would say it's more like Lennox Lewis. Lennox Lewis oftentimes would always just tell the truth, straight out, cold. He didn't want to follow a script. That and the fact that Lennox, had a little drinking problem. It seems like that's always the problem with these HBO commentators, but that's another story. But I just wanted to give you an example. Max Kellerman is kind of the same. Not the drinking, but the fact that he likes to call it down the middle and be fair with it. And you noticed it during the fight. He's sitting there telling you that the shots that Cuadras is throwing were not effective. The shots that Estrada was throwing were effective. I noticed it. I was like, you can literally see every time a jab would touch Cuadras, his eyes would roll in the back of his head. I mean, there was a snapping jab that had his head go back like a Pez dispenser a few times. And Jim Lampley wouldn't call it. I'm very surprised. Here's the thing with Andre Ward tonight. Andre Ward, he noticed more of the mechanics of the fight, more of studying the actual fighter's personality, and that goes hand in hand to how Ward breaks down fighters and fight. You can totally tell. Ward's commentary is reflective in how he is as a fighter. He's more into fighters' body language, fighters' attitudes, fighters' how they approach around. He's more from the psychological standpoint. But it was so obvious that Cuadras was getting his ass whipped. And I kept sitting up there saying in the group text, I'm talking to a few of the fellas, and I'm like, Cuadras is going to get knocked out. He's going to get knocked out. And I said he was going to get knocked out. And this was way before the knockdown in the 10th round, because I saw it. He was losing his footing, even when he switches. Now, he switches often in all of his fights. That's just his style of fighting. But his feet were all over the place. His mouth was wide open. I'm like, this is the guy that if you had listened to prior to these fights happening, they were building this because what this was supposed to be, and I'm going to give you an honest What I can tell where HBO was going with this. HBO had hoped that Quadros would win and Chocolatito would avenge the loss. All right? And what they wanted to do was because they had been burning for having a sequel to the Chocolatito and Roman Gonzalez fight. I mean, the Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez fight and the Quadros fight. And they really wanted to push that. They weren't going to say anything about it, but they really wanted that. Inouye's fight was his first fight over here on American soil, so they could sit there and put Inoue on the back burner and say, yeah, well, this was his first fight. He's going to step up. And I guarantee you, if Quadros had won tonight and Chocolatito had won, they would have put a card where you had the main event been Chocolatito Gonzalez and Quadros 2 and Inoue directly under the card. Because they're so transparent. And this is why HBO is in trouble. Okay? Because they have, it's a script. It's so scripted. And this is what happens when you script it and you have guys who are real fans of boxing, who study the sport, study fighters, study how they approach the game, study what their game plans are. We can tell when you're force-feeding garbage to us. Okay? Anybody can sit down and tell me. I actually had somebody comment on the video I did of the immediate reaction to Inoue versus the bank teller. Somebody in the comment section, I'm going to leave his comment up. He said exactly what I said in the video. To a layman, Inouye's going to look like a monster compared to this kid who was ill-equipped and should not have been in the ring with Inoue. But we know why he was put there. You're telling me that was a successful and it expanded the brand of Inoue here in the States to a true boxing fan who breaks this shit down, or a student of the game and craft. You're telling me that Inoue, he has sold himself as being one of the most dangerous fighters in the division. One punch at a time, no head movement, throws the same punch over again, telegraphing his shots, no footwork. That's the guy you're trying to sell to real students of the craft. No, you're not. You're trying to sell that to casuals. The same casuals who a year ago came on every last one of our videos, and the man who suffered the most brutal knockout I've seen of 2017. Okay? To a fighter who all he did was punch in between punches. All he did was he knew that he didn't have to even mix up his punches because Roman Chocolatito's head was at the exact same spot it always is. You're telling me that sold Inoue to those fans, or do you think it was set up to sell to the casuals? On to Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez. And I'm going to tell you why this is a big red flag when it comes to HBO boxing. Roman Chocolatito, I remember when Max Kellerman was going on this really superficial rant. And the reason why I'm saying it's a superficial rant is because I do not believe that Max Kellerman believes what he says. I wholeheartedly believe that Max Kellerman says what will get him paid. Because he does have a really good, excellent boxing mind. It really is. He sees things. He's more of a boxing historian, and he can compare one fighter of yesterday to today real quick. And a lot of times, if you do your research, he's spot on. So you know he knows what he's seeing and what he's looking at. But Max Kellerman tonight looked like it was like the death of Superman. Remember the Tuesday? Because again, Superman died on a Tuesday. I'm going into other shit, but I'm just giving you an example. On the day DC Comics announced the death of Superman, Superman died on a Tuesday. It was the Tuesday issue. Literally, watch the post fight. Max Kellerman did not want to give Sor Rungvisai any sort of credit because Max Kellerman truly wholeheartedly believed in Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez. And maybe he believed in him because, he started to believe in the hype himself. But it was so evident that Chocolatito Gonzalez was a sitting duck for any sort of counterpuncher or a puncher who's willing to engage, just like Amir Khan versus Danny Garcia. A guy who throws a lot of punches, the way you effectively counter that is you punch with him. You take a risk, but you punch with him. Shorin Bisai knew what he had in front of him, and he capitalized on it. And then you have Max Kellerman looking like he lost his dog tonight. And the reason why I say that HBO is in trouble, you got Canelo versus Triple G next week. If Canelo knocks Triple G off, right, who do they have left? They have the so-called second coming of Muhammad Ali, according to Bob Arum. And I am on the record as saying that I know for a fact Guillermo Rigondeaux is going to beat the living daylights out of Lomachenko. And you guys want to buy into the same HBO brand. This guy has all these amateur fights. You've never probably seen more than 10 of those amateur fights, but you're going to believe everything HBO tells you about Lomachenko. You're going to believe in the Flash. You're going to believe in everything that they tell you. And you know what you're going to do? You're going to end up cashing that ticket and not getting any money in return. Because we've watched and studied Guillermo Rigondeaux. We've seen Rigondeaux in the ring with bigger fighters, seen him in the ring with fast fighters, seen him in the ring with strong fighters. And each type of fighter, he's able to break them down effectively using his style. And he also can switch it up. He's shown multiple dimensions to his game. That's what makes a pound-for-pound fight. A pound-for-pound fighter, to me, pound-for-pound is very subjective, but I do feel it does have a standard of parameters that should go into factoring in when you're making a pound-for-pound list. Pound-for-pound should be a guy who you've seen him fight top-tier competition, and yeah, he may even struggle with a top-tier opponent, but he's able to switch that gear, able to change that play, able to go to game plan B, C, and D and overcome it and win. That's a pound-for-pound fighter. Pound-for-pound fighter is not a guy who fights the same style of opponent, beats them in the same way he beats everybody else, and then when he runs into an opponent who has a different style, who has a little bit more boxing IQ and loses, all of a sudden he ain't shit. No, he always wasn't shit. What he was he was gifted with the right opponent being in front of him. So if you don't think the HBO boxing executives are panicking right now, you have lost your mind. Trust me, after tonight's showing, after what they know is pending next week with Canelo and Triple G, and what hopefully will get made by December, Lomachenko and Rigondeaux, HBO boxing is in serious trouble. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. I've rambled on long enough. I'm going to take my ass to bed. It's your boy QuestX. I'm out. Peace.